Hey everybody, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. I hope you've been doing well out there. So in today's video, we're going to continue on with this theme of supporting your self-awareness. And we're going to be talking about something that I think is incredibly important to understand, and that is understanding and really recognizing the role of how your wounds shape your perception of everything in your life. And in particular, the kind of logic that comes out of you, the decision making, the quality of thinking that comes out of you, how that is shaped by your wounding at the deepest levels, and how you need to be accounting for this as you kind of work your path of healing and personal growth. So without further ado, let's talk about it. So yes, it is still very hot here in the Southwest. I am still, working with fans on me constantly, windows open constantly. So please forgive me if you see changes in the light, changes in the sound, that kind of a thing. And if I seem a little low energy, it's because I've just been trying to lay low and deal with the heat all day, sweat, and kind of like just try to like wait out the heat. So you may notice I seem a little relaxed and a little chill, and that's why that is. So anyways, I wanted to talk with you guys, just like the recent video that I literally just shot before this, about motivation and becoming self-aware about your motivational style and how it's actually working for you. Here's another piece of self-awareness that for me is one of these things that I think is incredibly obvious. When you see it, it's like, oh, right, of course. But I think for a lot of people, it's one of these places where we tend to have a blind spot and we cannot be very self-aware of it. And we don't really think too hard about how this shapes everything in our experience. And that is this recognition of how our deep core wounds kind of distort the filter, distort the lens, if you will, through which we look at life. And those distortions on our lens, therefore, totally alter the way we perceive things, including ourselves, those around us, our relationships, our possibilities, our capabilities, our potential, what we want in life. All of this is impacted by our early wounding, especially. And that really impacts and shapes the kind of logic, the kind of decision making, the kind of strategies that we come up with, the kind of insights we come up with. And so we really want to be self-aware of this and be accounting for this. Okay, so that's really my major point here in this video. This is true fairly universally. And this is one of these things that I so often see people not accounting for. And kind of the default assumption here is that whatever our window on reality is, whatever our particular set of feelings and perspectives and views and what we see as being obvious or how it is or the reality or the truth of the situation, whether it's about us or about other people or relationships or events in the world, we tend to assume that our perception is accurate and is the same as reality. And, I don't want to get into a whole rabbit hole of questioning what is reality and kind of semi-spiritually gaslighting you with, well, is anything you see valid or real and how can you trust? I'm not trying to go there with it, but I do want to really encourage you to take into account the way that your wounds totally shape the logic that you come up with, right? So, And that really shapes, the way you make sense of your own healing path, the things you think you need in order to heal. That shapes the way you process other people and your relationships and what's wounding to you or not. And it really shapes kind of the sense making from your experiences, right? So it's really easy for us to have a wound, and that creates a certain attitude and a certain perception, a certain worldview. And that then creates, the way that we interact with the world. And then we get some sort of feedback from the world, maybe that we don't like, or something that's disappointing or painful or frustrating or not what we wanted. And then that becomes more fuel that reinforces the belief system that was built out of the wound in the first place. Does that make sense? I can give a little more practical example, but before I do, I want to kind of just also highlight this is true not only just in life in general, and this is not only true just for those of us who come from a background of trauma and wounding, this is true for everyone, but and I want to say, well, it's on my mind, well, it's on my heart, we've got to be fucking accounting for this. Because if I'm assuming that these distortions in my perception are reality and the truth and accurate in how it is, they're going to steer me off the mark. They're going to, it's like when you drive in a car where the alignment's off and it naturally starts to drift off the road. That's not how the car is built to drive. That's not the car functioning properly. That's the bias of a slightly not properly functioning car. And if you assume that that's correct and how the car is supposed to be, and you leave your hands off the wheel, you'll drift off the road and potentially die or hurt yourself, right? Same thing here with the wounds, these kind of core wounds, and how they distort our lens of understanding ourself and the lens through which we view and interpret the world, right? So let me give an example that's a little more grounded and practical, so that I'm not just kind of riffing and yammering on here. So early wounds, a lot of times, not always, but often, are wounds to our attachment system. So I've done other videos on attachment. You can look up attachment theory. I'll be talking about it more, but essentially our attachment system is the part of our nervous system that is organized around how we connect with others. And how we connect with others creates a sense of a set of information, a feedback loop that tells us about ourselves, tells us about our environment, and at a more deep level in the nervous system creates a sense of safety or not safety for how we feel, right? So our attachment system is really, really central and key and foundational and core to how our whole nervous system is set up. Now, there are certain ways that if we have certain kind of traumatic early childhood experiences that can impact our attachment system and distort it in particular ways, right? So that's where we get these insecure attachment styles like avoidant or anxious or disorganized, right? So let's use avoidant as an example. So the kind of classic scenario that happens for an avoidant attachment person is that they were maybe they had an overbearing parent, or they had a parent that felt really unsafe, or they had a parent that just really neglected them and was really bad about tuning into their kid, making sure that the kid felt connected and provided for and taken care of and well loved and well connected. And there's a lot of reasons why this can be, from a very stressed out, traumatized parent themselves to parent that's an addict, et cetera, et cetera. But generally, there's this pattern of very early on in life for an avoidant person having this conclusion, right, based on these wounding experiences, that I can't trust other people to meet my needs, provide for me, show up for me, notice I'm here. So I've got to do it all for me myself, right? So avoidant people prefer to keep some distance from other people because other people can be dangerous and disappointing and painful, and they prefer to be alone, have space, and meet all their needs kind of overly independently, over self-sufficiently, right? So hopefully you can start to see how that wounding creates a distortion in belief in the filter of how this young child sees the world and sees relationships and oneself and how all this fits together. And then, if that's never corrected, that wound and that distortion carries on through the rest of the person's life, right? So now imagine that person is in their mid-20s or their early 30s, and they are continuing to have experiences that are being interpreted through this lens of people aren't safe, I can't trust others, I feel better when I have more space, I will do everything myself. And then, the classic issues for people like this is, intimacy issues, trust issues, having a hard time really feeling close to people. There's a lot of conflict between I want a relationship and I want to be alone. There's a lot of Again, over independence, that can create a lot of conflict when people want to feel connected or needed by these people, et cetera, right? So the reason I bring all this up is that if we're not aware of how our wounds are distorting our thinking, distorting the conclusion making that arises out of us, then we're going to assume that the thoughts we think and the emotions we feel are true and accurate and sane and balanced and the right choice and the healthy thing. And whatever my conclusion that I make is, that's right. And we're not really accounting for the way that we may be kind of out of tune and naturally drift off course like that car, right? This becomes even more so exaggerated once you add something like mushrooms or LSD into the mix, right? So, or even more so DMT or ketamine or something really extreme and far out like that, right? So all of a sudden you have people who are having thoughts, because you're on a psychedelic, you already have this distorted lens through which you view life that doesn't automatically get corrected just because you're taking psychedelics. Let's be clear. Attachment wounds and issues don't get automatically corrected just by taking psychedelics. You can use psychedelics to address those wounds, but it takes much more focus, intention, skill, and willingness to go there. It doesn't just automatically, I feel good, and so therefore my attachment stuff is no longer a problem. It doesn't work like that, trust me. So now imagine you have someone who has this distorted lens that they've never dealt with and never corrected. The wounds are still there fundamentally, and the logic that comes out of those wounds is still there. So the trust issues or the other way around, the codependency issues, the clinginess, the bad boundaries, these kinds of things, they all stem out of these early wounds, right? And then you add a bunch of mushrooms. You add 4 grams of mushrooms into the mix, and this person is high as a kite. Their nervous system and their unconscious mind is speaking, and they're having all these thoughts and these realizations bubbling up through them. Maybe some of these realizations are accurate and true overall. They're useful, they're valuable, they're things we might want to integrate afterwards. But maybe some of those realizations have a strongly, kind of warped bias based on this person's wounding and their wounded worldview that they've never really addressed or processed, right? Maybe some of these realizations are partial truths, kind of accurate, but kind of not. And again, are distorted from, both the mushrooms and the wounding. And maybe some of the realizations that bubble up through a person in this situation are just literally not true at all. But again, if we're not used to challenging or tracking or accounting for how our wounding and our life experiences have distorted our logic, our way of processing life, our way of processing ourselves or processing others, if we're not tracking for that, we're not accounting for it, we're not being like, I've got my own weird biases that are from my own weird wounds that still need healing. If we're not tracking that, then it's easy to get kind of confused about all that, and then that can end up creating conclusions that are actually very much emotional thinking that we don't recognize as emotional thinking and think is clear, logical, good sense making, and then we might even run these kinds of conclusions by others, and other people will go, I don't know, or really, are you sure? I don't know if I agree with that. And then we get all defensive. I see a lot of this where people get defensive about the realizations that they've had on psychedelics and get very dogmatic about it. So that's what I'm encouraging you to think about here. I want you to really become self-aware of this. I want you to become self-aware, A, that you have wounds, B, what they are, and C, in what way they tend to kind of bias you. And I think this is really where it's helpful to know a bit about attachment theory and kind of the tendencies of the nervous system when our attachment system is a bit wounded, and how that tends to kind of shape the way we process all these things. and not just early wounds, but it could even be things like stuff from your teenage years, or your experience in grade school was terrible, or you had a really bad, summer at summer camp, or learning to drive was traumatic, et cetera, et cetera. There can be all kinds of stuff well through your teenage years and even into your, adult years that can also distort and be these wounds that kind of distort the lens. But the bottom line here is that if we want to be self-aware, we need to start accounting for this, because it really does help us to start to not take our own thoughts and emotions so literally all the time, so seriously all the time, and therefore that gives us a bit of wiggle room to explore what's true, what's not true, what's emotional thinking, what's accurate perception, and start to get a clearer track on all of that, which just makes us generally, I think, a more functional, grounded, connected, balanced person. Obviously, the next step from there, beyond just being self-aware of this stuff, is starting to actually heal the wounds. And it's pretty amazing to me how consistently, as we heal the wounds, the logic that comes out of us totally changes. What we used to see as difficult or impossible feels very easy. The things that we used to be really self-judgmental about, now we're very compassionate with ourselves about. The things that we used to be very projecting on others or bitter to the world about, all of a sudden we're kind of like, it is what it is. And these things really can smooth out and open up and not eat up so much bandwidth of struggle and confusion and processing and all of that when we clean up the actual wounds and kind of correct the lens, so to speak. So I do think psychedelics can be useful for that process. Like I said, though, it's not a guarantee that just consuming them will take you there. It really takes a bit more know-how and a bit more actually doing the work, actually leaning into healing the wounds and understanding your trauma patterns and how that's shaped you. So anyways, that's my message too. I know it's a little bit heavy, but I think it's a really important piece to get this, to really get, I've got wounds here, and they create a bias, and that bias isn't always going to work in my favor. If you like this kind of content, please do consider, if you're not subscribed, subscribing, which is always lovely to see the number go up. I'm not going to lie. Leave a comment down below, even more so the numbers going up. I love human interaction. I'd love to know what you think about this. If you feel driven to work with me, like you feel like I'm hitting upon something that really resonates for you and you'd like to work with me, my email is down below in the information of this video. I would encourage you to email me. I'm always welcoming new emails, and we can set up a call and we can talk and we can figure out whether or not we'd be a good fit, and whether or not I might be able to help you in some way, or maybe I can refer you to someone else if it's not going to be me. If you have any questions, comments, again, leave it down below. Other than that, I'm going to leave it there because I'm kind of awkwardly yammering on at the end of the videos, as I tend to do, because I'm not a good YouTuber. Anyways, much love to you guys. I appreciate you all. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.